Welcome everybody to the solution to your coding exercise on inheritance. So what we need in this exercise is we need a weapon parent class and a sword child class. So let's create those right now. So remember, go to source and then right click and new class, and we'll just name this one weapon. We should create the parent class first, weapon, and all of these settings look good, so hit finish. Okay, and now create the sword. So just do the same thing, except here for the subclass or for the superclass, we are going to want to change that to weapon, just like I had specified. Okay, cool. So we got our two classes up and ready to go. So let's get coding first with our parent class, our superclass. Okay, so we have our public class weapon. What do we need? We need three instance variables: name, max damage, and a static variable. We'll do the static one later. So let's just go string name, and then int max damage. So we already know this is a superclass, and we're going to have a subclass that inherits this, and we're going to want to use these variables in our subclass. So we're going to want to make these protected. Remember, protected is that newer accessor. Protected is just like private, but it also allows you to use them in subclasses. So just remember that. We're going to want a protected variables. And we're also going to want a static variable called int num weapons. So we're just going to want to make this public because we're going to be accessing this probably in other places, I already know. So we're going to go public static int num weapons, and like I said in the specification, it's going to keep track of the number of weapons created, just so we kind of have a bearing on how many we've created, and this could be useful to us in our game. So we're going to have this static variable. So now what we need next is we need a method called calculate damage that returns a random int from 0 to max damage. So I see the word random integer, and I already know I'm going to need that math class that has the random objects. So go import java.lang.math. This is how you import all of the mathy stuff, as well as the random numbers are included in there also. Okay, so let's make this calculate damage method. So it says to call it calculate damage. I spelled it kind of funny. That I like to go underscores in when I create my methods, and because you can't do spaces obviously, but I don't like to name them the same way I name my variables, so I'm just going to go like that, public calculate damage, and it doesn't need any parameters or anything, and all it has to do is return an integer from 0 to max damage. So we don't really need much code here. Just go return, and then we need a random integer, so we know math.random is to get a random integer, and it needs to be from 0 to max damage. So from 0 to max damage, if you just go times, actually what we're going to need is max damage plus 1 is what's going to accomplish this code, because remember, math.random returns an integer from 0 and then anything less than 1. So if we just multiply it by max damage, we're going to get a number from 0 to max damage minus 1. So that's how we're going to need to do that. And also it needs to be an integer, so just kind of do that typecast there. And actually what we'll do is we'll go int of this. We'll go like that. And that's how we calculate our random numbers. We're getting error here. Oh, return type is missing. Remember, it's going to return an integer. Sometimes you type and think too fast and you miss that kind of crap. It's one of those days. Okay, so now we're also we're missing a constructor, so let's just create that right now also. Public. I didn't put that in the specification, but I was hoping you kind of figured, hey, this is a class, probably need a constructor, so hopefully you created that. Int max damage. This is just what mine looked like. Maybe you did something a little different. So I incremented num weapons in this class, because every time you're creating any instance of this class, I'm going to want to increase num weapons. So I'm going to want to increase num weapons if it's a subclass of weapons also, not just if I'm just creating a general weapon. I want num weapons to increase, so we're going to have to take care of that in all of the subclasses, but we'll get to that in a sec when we edit sword. We also need to set the name and max damage, so just set those real quick. Looking good. Okay, and that's all I had in my constructor. That's all you really need to have. So also real quick, well, I'll take care of it later. Just leave you on edge here. So now let's go to our sword class. What do we need in our sword? We already have our subclass, and sword also has calculate damage, but it has a 50% strength bonus. So it says you should return the random integer increased by 50%. So we already have all of we have the instance variable name, and we have the instance variable what's it called? Max damage. So we have those two instance variables already, so we don't need to add those into our class. We are going to need a constructor, and we're also going to need calculate damage. So we're going to override calculate damage, public int calculate damage, but it's almost the same function, but it's just slightly different. So all we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to return int, and we could type all of that code out again for the random integer from 0 to max damage, but we already have that. What we can do is we can just type super.calculate damage. And that's going to do the same exact thing for us. We don't have to type out all of that math code again. We don't have to import the math class actually. It's already all here for us if we just type super.calculate damage. So that's going to return the number it would return if it was the same method, but it's 50% stronger. So in terms of, this is just kind of math, you're just going to want to multiply that by 1.5, and that'll give you a number 50% stronger than the one that is returned from the random number or the calculate damage method. So that's all I had in this method too. As you can see, it's getting pretty. It's not really a long program. It's actually pretty short. And now we also need our constructor in here. So go public sword, and we're also going to have string name and int max damage, just like the other one. Except, like I said, just kind of like with the calculate damage class, you don't need you don't need to redo all that code that you did in the super classes method. So you can just go super and then type name and max damage, and it'll assign those variables for us already, because that code is already typed out in our constructor. So we have that part done, and actually that's all we need to do in this class too. The only thing different about the sword class is the as you can see in the calculate damage class, that's the only thing different. So when you're creating a new class, a new subclass I should say, the things that you want to take into consideration are think specifically about the constructors and the things you're changing from the parent class. So you really want to think about those two things. If you have a new subclass, what you're changing, and the constructors, because as like I said, the constructors aren't inherited, so those you need to change, and you also need to change obviously anything that you want to change that needs to be changed also. Okay, so now let's go back and let's see. We need to create two swords. All right, so this is back into our main, our static void main. We're actually getting into the meat of our program. We're creating two swords of different names and max damages, and output one run of calculate damage for each, and also output the total number of weapons. So kind of just demonstrate what we created. So what I was going to add before is I was just going to add a getter method for the name, because we want to output these names of the swords. So let's just create a getter method real quick. So public string get name, and just go return name. Okay, and now we're ready to actually execute our code. So now we are going to create two swords. So sword, let's go sword 1 instead of equal to new sword. I'll name my sword the Beast. It's going to have a max damage of 100. And now we'll create sword 2, and I'll name this one All Reliable, and it'll have max damage of 75. And now all I have to do is print out the total number of weapons created, and also one run of calculate damage for each. So let's print those out. Printf. I'm going to use printf for these to make it look nicer. And we will go %s colon %d. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type out the name of the sword. So I should have sword, well, I'll go sword1.getName. So that's going to fill %s. And then %d, we're going to want to print out the damage done. So just go sword 1 dot calculate damage. And I messed up a little bit. Forgot my parentheses. Okay. Does that look good? Looks good. And now we just need to do the same exact thing really for sword 2. So just change that to sword 2. Okay. And also just print out the number of weapons. So just system.out.printf. And the total number of weapons and %d. And so all we'll have to do really is just print out sword. Remember, we're just going to actually weapon. We're just going to access the class and then type dot num weapons. And so you're probably thinking, well, if you create a sword, or you're not probably thinking, maybe you already know the answer, but if you're creating a sword, num weapons doesn't get changed anywhere. Well, right here, we're calling the superclasses constructor, and if you look in here, the superclasses constructor increments num weapons. So we should be good to go. Okay, so let's check out what we get here. If we just run this. Oops, let me go new line. Go new line at the end of these to make these look nicer, because that's gonna bother me. It's kind of stuff I can't stand. And okay, that's good enough. So we see the beast hit a 132, Old Reliable hit a 31, and you can see that there's 2 number of weapons. So you can see that the number of weapons works. We got 2, and let's kind of check out some different runs of the beast and Old Reliable. So if you think about it, the maximum number for the beast should be 150, because technically it's 100 with the random number, but it's also multiplied by 50%. So technically 150. So we're still within that range. And for Old Reliable, it's 75 times 50%, which is what? Probably just a little over 100. So let's see if we get those numbers about. Getting some different numbers. So even though the max damage for Old Reliable is less, it still has the chance to score higher, which is always kind of fun in games to have that underdog story. So we're just getting some different runs here. Yeah, so you can see it. We're getting some pretty cool different numbers. So our program works exactly how we want it to, because we're awesome and we know how to program. So that's just kind of an example of how to use inheritance in a practical method in a game, and this can be applied anywhere, of course. So I hope this exercise was helpful to you, as well as my explanation. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, send me an email, whatever you need to do, and I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.